So, Liz, I'll let you introduce yourself. Tell us a wee bit about yourself.
Oh yeah, no, thanks for having me, guys. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, I'm Liz McConaghy, the author of Chinook Crew Chick, and I'm the longest-serving female on the Chinook force. I still hold the record. I did 17 years serving as a female crewman on there. And there's one girl who's coming behind me. She served for 14 and a bit years, so I'm really hoping she gets posted soon so I can keep my record. But yeah, that's me. That's a little bit about me.
Right. So, first question I'm going to ask you, Liz. What was it that ignited the spark for you to join the RAF? Why the RAF out of all the branches?
Well, the army do a lot of marching, don't they? Or sorry, a lot of like living in ditches and marching and drill and things like that. And I guess I figured let's try something different. But no, actually, my older brother was really keen on the army when we were kids, and we used to go off in Northern Ireland. We lived in the countryside, and we used to play in the woods and things like that, and take our little rucksacks and our walkie-talkies. And when he was 18, he went up to a place called Palace Barracks back home in Northern Ireland, where we're from, and he went to do his barb test, which is his entrance test into the army. And me, being his little sister, went for some moral support. And while he was in doing this exam, I saw this magazine on the table, and it had a guy hanging out the side of a helicopter. So I just thought straight away that was the coolest job in the world. And I asked the chaps there in uniform what the job was about, and they basically told me that it was a helicopter crewman. And that was me. I just wanted to be the rock star hanging out the side of the helicopter. So I did a couple of interviews myself, got accepted to go across to RAF Cranwell, and passed my aptitude tests. And then I joined on my 19th birthday, which was a week after 9/11 happened. So that obviously then changed the kind of the direction of my career somewhat, and really defined all the things I went on to do.
So, what was the process of actually becoming a member of the Chinook Crews?
Yeah, so I mentioned there a minute ago, I do aptitude test before I was then accepted to enter as air crew. And then as part of that, we do airman air crew basic training. So you do 3 months where you're running around in various exercise areas, and you're building tripods, and you're all learning to work as a team together. So you've got 3 months of basic training, and that is properly marching up and down the square, and making your bed packs, all the usual stuff that the army and the navy do. You finish that after 3 months, and then we go to a place called RAF Shawbury. And RAF Shawbury is in the Midlands, and it's where we basically start our basic helicopter training. Whenever I went through, we worked on a Huey helicopter, well, a small Huey helicopter, which is essentially called a Griffin. And it's a little tiny training helicopter. And you basically learn then to work with the pilots as a crew, because the pilots are really used to flying a little helicopter on their own, and they're not so good at working with somebody else as part of the crew and divvying out the job. So we really have to kind of learn how to divvy up the tasks together and to work safely as a crew to get slightly bigger helicopters into the clearings. Then when you finish that, after 6 months, you get posted to whichever aircraft you're going to be on for the rest of your career. So I was very lucky that I got Chinooks, because that was the only aircraft I ever wanted to fly on. I'd seen a Chinook very early on whenever I was doing my selection process, and in one of my interviews, it came right over the top of me at 20 feet back in Northern Ireland, and I just looked up, and the noise of a Chinook, it just gets you right in the chest. So I fell in love with Chinook way back then, and I was very lucky that I then got my dream and was sent to the Chinook force. So I did 6 months essentially of learning how to operate the Chinook, and then off to my first squadron after that.
Now, see, when you first got word that you were joining the Chinook Crews, can you recall what your initial reaction was?
Yeah, so it was a little bit backwards, really, because at the end of that Shawbury course where you're doing your basic helicopter training, you get given what is called a dream sheet. And a dream sheet is where you get to put down which aircraft you'd like to go and fly on. And at the time, the RAF operated the Chinook, the Puma helicopter, which is still operating, and the Sea Kings, so all the search and rescue aircraft, and the Merlins had also just come into service. So there was a choice of 4, and I put Chinook for 1, 2, 3, and 4 because it was all I wanted to fly on. But at the end of the course, you do a thing called a roll demo, and a roll disposal, and you basically run around under cargo nets, round a stick, drink a lot of beer, and at the bottom of your pint of beer, it'll tell you which aircraft you're going to be posted to. So I went for my go on the assault course, and when I drank my pint of beer, it had Merlin on the bottom of the glass, and I was absolutely gutted. And not more than half an hour later, the course commander came over and said, actually, Liz, because the Merlins had only just come into service and they were really struggling with serviceability, so all of their courses were backlogged, and the Chinook force had only just gone to war to Iraq, so they were really crying out for crews in the front line. So by the skin of my teeth, I was re-rolled to Chinooks that night, and I honestly never felt relief and elation like it. So it's fair to say there was a lot more beer drunk that night. But no, I was so glad because I was going with all my mates, and all my mates were going to Chinooks as well. So yeah, absolute elation. It was really good.
See when you done
Yeah.
your training, were you the only female doing the training at that time?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I joined my basic training, there was 3 of us, and then by the time I got to helicopters, I was the only female. The other 2 went off to different courses, so it was just me on all the helicopter training. And I was the youngest on my course by about 9 years as well, so quite
Oh,
unique
really?
in that respect. Yeah, but when I got to Odium, I wasn't the first female ever in Chinooks. There was a couple of females that had been before me, but I then ended up staying there and lasting the longest. I think the rest all went off to have kids or got their commission or did something different, whereas I just stayed because I loved it.
See, in your book, you mentioned that when you were assigned to your Chinook squadron, that you end up receiving quite a lot of interesting nicknames during your time in the service. You want to possibly highlight on some of these nicknames?
Yeah, no, I mean, everyone in the forces gets a nickname, it's fair to say. And I think whenever I first started, I was called Patty for a while, and then I was called Mac for a while because my surname's McConaghy. And then whenever we go under the front line, I mean, all air crew love to have a joke name badge, and a lot of them have sort of name badges for air shows and things like that. Such as Bend Over, for example, is always a funny one. And I got nicknamed many, many years ago Gloria Stitz. So I had a name badge that had Gloria Stitz on it, and it was on the back of my helmet. It was on my nav bag and whatnot. I had another one on my nav bag called Norma Snockers, which was quite funny. I don't think that's in the book, but that was another joke nickname. But actually, all said and done, I had that on the back of my helmet, that Gloria Stitz badge, and it was black and pink. And on, some really tough days in Helmand, I'd be sat on the ramp manning the M60 weapon, which we had fitted to the ramp. And, I'd sometimes glance over my shoulder, and all the soldiers that we were carrying down the back, they'd have clocked my helmet badge, and they'd all be elbowing each other, and this little ripple of laughter would go down the aircraft. And I thought, I think it's fair to say out in Helmand there were some really rough days, but if you can maintain a little sense of humor on the worst days, then that kind of gets you through. So hopefully I made a couple of people chuckle over the years.
I can safely say that I had a wee bit of a laugh when I was reading some of the nicknames. But you've missed one out.
Oh, which one was that one?
Is am I right in saying that used to be called Angry Lesbian?
Oh, that was one I almost gave to myself. But yeah, whenever I first joined, I had short, spiky hair, and it's fair to say I did look like an angry lesbian. And then, as kind of my career went on, that kind of used to be a bit of the joke because I was quite in the end. But whenever I left the military, I ended up working for a simulator company that did the Chinook simulator, and the uniform was cargo pants and a polo shirts, and I looked instantly again like an angry lesbian. So it's kind of a theme throughout the book. And thankfully, when the book came out, it wasn't, the editors let me keep the kind of that humor in, and I hope it doesn't offend anyone. There's plenty of, I think there's plenty of lesbians who have contacted me and loved the book, so I'm quite happy that I haven't offended them and they took the sense of humor as it was meant to be.
You mentioned there about the highs and the lows. So for those of the people that don't know, of course, you have been on operational tour. You've been to places such as Iraq and Afghanistan. What was your initial feeling when you were told that you were being deployed?
So initially, I couldn't wait because, I'd kind of gone through all that training. I'd joined to do a job, and I couldn't wait to go out and actually do it. And I remember being on the squadron, because you sort of arrive in the squadron with L plates a little bit, and you're kind of not really you don't go to war straight away. So you're kind of going to earn your trade a little bit and kind of learn a lot of the self-defense kit and things like that before you're allowed to deploy. And I remember, seeing the bus pull up outside the squadron with all the guys coming back in their desert combats, and they're all tanned and they all had these war stories. And I just couldn't wait to be part of that and to go. So the first deployment I did was Iraq, and it was after the war fighting had finished. So, all the invasion of Baghdad had happened, and the Air Force were pretty well established, started working out of Basra with all the coalition forces. So a lot of the stuff we were doing was just kind of moving people and supplies around the theatre. But I remember my first memory really being, it was so hot, and being from Northern Ireland, obviously you guys are from Scotland, we're not used to those kind of temperatures at all, and it was just overwhelmingly warm. And then when you put your helmet on, you're wearing body armor, and you're doing quite a manual physical job in the back of the aircraft, it was really, really tough physically. obviously I did 2 deployments there, and then we pulled out of Iraq, and the whole Chinook force went towards Afghanistan. And I think for me, I kind of knew Afghanistan was going to be slightly tastier because we fitted the miniguns to the aircraft, and before in Iraq we'd only had the M60 guns, which fire about 200 rounds in 2 minutes. They are, they're the old aircraft weapons they used to use in the Vietnam War, bungeed to the side of Hueys. Very, very reliable, but yeah, not a huge amount of firepower really. And then for Afghanistan, we fitted these miniguns, and miniguns fire 3,000 rounds a minute. So that was a huge amount of firepower. And I thought, well, we're not fitting these for no reason. There's a very good reason why we're fitting them. And also before we went, we also had to do the escape and evasion training. So the resistance to interrogation training, a little bit like Foxy's SAS, Who Dares Wins. It's very accurate. That is pretty much what it's like. So I thought there's a reason why we're having to do all that. And it was pretty fair to say that when we got to Afghanistan, early, maybe 1 or 2 deployments were quite quiet again because we were building Camp Bastion. There weren't that many British troops on the ground. And then from about 2007 onwards, it got very, very tasty, very kinetic, very quickly. And that's when things like, we got shot at every day. We were getting RPG'd and mortared on landing sites. But most importantly, the MERT, which was that medical emergency response team, the airborne ambulance. Then we started to see all the worst kind of injuries on the back of that. Whereas before it had been fairly benign injuries. And now we were picking up casualties, who had literally, limbs missing, gunshot wounds to the head, mass casualty scenarios. So it started, it started quite quiet again, but ramped up really quickly.
See, whilst you were deployed in Afghanistan, can you give us an idea of what home was like at Bastion? Can you tell us what it was like? What was there? How was it all set up?
Yeah, that is a good question. And I don't know if the podcast, no one ever asked that. So in the early days, we were based in Kandahar Air Base, which was quite well set up. We had like hardened accommodation, so like big, like long, metal roofed buildings, and lots of little rooms off the main corridor. But when we moved to Camp Bastion, so we basically in the early days were just underslinging loads of equipment across the Red Desert to build Camp Bastion, which was just a barbed wire fence to begin with. And then we started to put all the infrastructure in there. So slowly the whole Chinook force moved across. And when we first got there, it was all tented accommodation. So 12 by 12s, and we just rows and rows and rows of 12 by 12 tents. So there's always the joke that the RAF like to stay in hotels and travel the world and have like, swan for breakfast and champagne and things like that. We definitely didn't have any of that. We were right in amongst it all. And on my first couple of deployments, when we were based out of Bastion, we were sharing the same shower block as all the paras, and I was the only female. So again, having to go in and shimmy in behind one little shower curtain and have my shower in the morning and then come back out again. But they were, again, the banter was flowing and they were good as gold. And I think, for all those kind of scenarios, you realize that you're all just there to do a job. So in the early days, it was very, very basic. And then Camp Bastion got bigger and bigger. And, it ended up with a bus route that went around it. It had a few little coffee shops. Again, it was certainly not luxury, but there was a couple of internet cabins so you could get on the internet every day if you needed to, and phone cabins so you could phone home. And again, in the early days, you got a phone card that gave you 20 minutes to phone home a week. And then it got leaked to the government or the press, I think, that we got 20 minutes a week, and prisoners get 30 minutes a week. So we finally got upped and we got 30 minutes a week to phone home. But yeah, like day-to-day life was basically, if you weren't flying, you were going to the gym, you were kind of chilling out, having a coffee. But most of the time, most days, you'd be either flying, standby to go flying, planning missions, or you'd be on that MERT standby. So you couldn't really do a lot when you're on that. You just sort of had to stay near the tent and wait for the worst phone call to come, and then off we went as fast as we could.
See, when that call did come, when the alarm was raised, what was the process?
Yeah, so all the troops up the Helmand Valley would carry a thing called a 9-liner, and a 9-liner was a little card format, and it had 9 lines on it. And the 9 lines were basically their call sign, location, what the injury was in terms of like a category. So T1 was the worst injury, T3 was a walking wounded, and T2 was somewhere in between. So we would get that through, and then the rest of the card had some more information, things like the landing site details and that kind of stuff, if there was enemy close by. We didn't always get that though, but we would launch on the first 2 lines, maybe the third, but they would carry that up in the Helmand Valley. Say one of them stood in an ID, or there was a gunfight, and someone took a gunshot wound to the head, then that reporting format would come straight back to Bastion on a thing called the BattleNet. And the BattleNet was like a huge connected network, like an internet for just Afghanistan. So that information would come straight back to Camp Bastion, and then it would get phoned straight into our tent. So literally the phone in the corner of the tent would ring, one crew member would answer it, and then the rest of the crew would run straight to the aircraft. So they'd sprint out as fast as they could. The medics from the tent beside us would run, and the force protection, which were whichever infantry soldiers were on the duty at the time, so it could be Paras, Marines, RAF Regiment, whoever, they'd be sprinting out as well. So everyone's running, engineers are running out, everyone's getting the aircraft spun up as quick as they can, and whoever stayed behind to take the details writes all the details down and then comes racing out to catch everyone up, plugs into the intercom and gives in all the information. So the pilots are now starting the aircraft as fast as they can, punching the grid into the kit, spinning up the engines. Usually we'll start one engine, start the heads turning, the rotor blades, and then start the other engine. But for things like merch outs, we just start it all up really, really quickly. And the fastest I think I've ever been airborne in a merch out was 3.5 minutes, which is really, really quick. And I think a lot of crews are probably about the same. So we would get airborne as fast as we could. And again, all we needed was a call sign and location to be able to go. And off we'd head to wherever we were headed to get the casualties. And very often with these things, you don't usually get shot in the head and have a gunfight without some enemy being close by. And things like, a lot of the IED strikes, there was still a huge threat when we got there. So it would be some of the tastiest flying you do, because you'd go in where the Taliban are still really, really close, and they'd see us coming because we're a huge target. So I think I've taken probably more incoming and outgoing fire on merch outs than in any of the other stuff, really. But we had a job to do. It was the best flying we did with the greatest sense of purpose, really, because you're not going to get better than going in to save lives.
Well, at the end of the day, Liz, if it wasn't for the crews like you, there would be a lot of personnel that wouldn't have been able to come home.
Yeah, and that's always really lovely to hear. And I think, I've been lucky enough since doing that job, and obviously the book coming out, that people have contacted me now on social media who we picked up. And that's a really lovely full circle moment where, people who were literally lying on a stretcher coming past us at the ramp have been able to thank us many years later. So, and we, I remember very early on in my career, one of my instructors said, Liz, it's all about the guy in the ditch. The whole reason the Chinook Force exists is for that one soldier in the ditch. And that stayed with me for my entire career. And, no matter what we did, it was all about rescuing that one soldier out of the ditch.
Well, the next question, you didn't have to go into full details about, of course, but the next question is going to be the dreaded one. What would you say is the most darkest day that you've experienced whilst in service? What was the one that sticks with you the most?
Whilst in service. So again, it's probably one of those MERT days. I think my busiest day in MERT, we had 16 shouts back to back, and we were just going out and bringing casualties back in who were in a really bad way. We would get another shout while we're already airborne, so another 9-liner coming through in the radio, and we'd go back out for more. And casualties dying down the back of the aircraft as well. So when you've seen a casualty die and then you're having to go back for more, again, that's really hard to just kind of go box that up, move on, go and get the next one. But the one that really sticks in my mind is we picked up 5 of the rifles regiment who had all been killed in one go, and by the time we went to get them, all 5 bodies came past me at the ramp of the aircraft, and they had flags draped over the bodies on stretchers. And because there were rifles there from kind of Liverpool's direction, so there was a Liverpool flag on one, a Man United flag on one, a Welsh flag on one, a Union Jack on one, and a Rifles flag on the other. And I still remember them going past me to this day, because I think it's not even just the image of the bodies going past, but the guys carrying the stretchers to then have to set the guys down on the floor. They all touched the bodies and then went back out past me at the ramp into the fight again. And you think, there's nothing I can say or no smile I can give on a day like that that's going to make that better for them. So that was really tough. Definitely a tough day at Stays.
Well, counter the low with a high. What was your most memorable moment, a joyful moment, I should say?
Joyful moment. Well, I think it's probably back here in the UK. I went to a grammar school back in Northern Ireland, and very much was told at school that I had to go to university, I had to get a degree and all these things. And they hadn't really, although they had a very good cadet force, they didn't really push the forces as a very successful career or a strong career path. So whenever off I went to the RAF, and then many years later, we were doing some tasking back there, and they said, I asked if I could take a Chinook into my old school, and the guys over in Northern Ireland at the base at Aldergrove said, yeah, actually, that's probably a really good idea. So they thought, I think it'd be good for PR and good for public relations. So I went to land at my old school, and all those teachers that 5 years before had said, oh, you're never going to make something of your life, and then wanted to have a look around my big helicopter. So it was a really great day to be able to, I guess my family were there as well to show them what I did, because trying to describe what a crewman does to people is really quite difficult, but to show them was so much better. But also for all those young kids to kind of come around and just to look around the aircraft and kind of realize that it is a brilliant career. I've been back to the school since then, and people still talk about it, but it also changed a lot of the career kind of where they did things and how they sold things to the kids. So I think that's really important for any young people that are watching this today, is that you don't need a degree to have an amazing career in life. I got paid and had the best time looking out the window most of my career. So, just dream big is what I always tell young people these days.
See how you mentioned about being able to go to school and show it off to your old teachers and all the younger generation and that. I'll share you one of my personal stories for the first time I seen a Chinook. I must have been maybe about 9, 10 years old. It was Armed Forces Day. It was being held in Edinburgh, right next to Holyrood, and there was a Chinook and there was an Apache next to it, and there was a Harrier next to that. And for some reason, I was just drawn to the Chinook. Fuck the Apache, fuck the Harrier. I'm going straight for the Chinook. I don't know what it was. It was just something that drew me to it. I absolutely loved it. And ever since that day, whenever I hear Chinook, I get some sort of shiver. I didn't even serve. I didn't even serve in the Chinooks, but for some reason I get that shiver.
That's good. And a lot of the soldiers say the same. It's nicknamed the sound of freedom, because when they hear a Chinook coming over the hill, they know that things are going to be okay. And for a lot of the injured soldiers that we picked up on Mert, they all said that as soon as they got over the ramp on their stretcher, they knew that they were going to be okay. And some of them had the worst injuries. We're talking triple amputees. They said as soon as they got on the back of the aircraft, there's something about that they thought, we're going to be okay now. And I still live really close to one of the training areas. So for example, last night I drifted off to sleep with the noise of a Chinook going round and round in my house. And you're right, it's my spirit aircraft. It'll stay with me forever, I think. And I still stand and take videos of them every time I see one. And all my friends take the mic and go, Liz, you worked on them for 17 years, let it go. But I can't. It's absolutely ingrained in me, the Chinook aircraft.
You also came quite close to death at one point in the Chinook, didn't you?
Yeah, definitely. So we got shot at a lot of the time. I dodged quite a few near misses with bullets and quite high caliber bullets as well. But actually, the nearest I came to really coming a cropper was we hit a set of wires out in Afghanistan in Kajaki Dam, which is north of the Helmand Valley. And wires are called helicopter killers for a very good reason. And most smaller helicopters will get taken out of the sky by a set of wires. Any of the even Pumas and things like that will not fare well against a big set of wires. And here in the UK, we generally know where they are, and we've got really good moving maps that tell us where they are. They get updated within 12 hours of any of those new wires being put up, but we don't have that in Afghanistan. And we flew up to Kajaki, dropped on some load off, and as we came out of the landing point, went straight into a set of 250-foot high voltage wires. So the same as the ones you see here in the UK, the really, really big ones. The whole aircraft sort of jolted, and my other crewman, who's from Glasgow, actually, he's from Motherwell, he had gone through the centre hatch, and thankfully his harness had saved him that day, so he was climbing back into the aircraft. I looked down to the 3 o'clock, and the wires were sparking off in the 3 o'clock, and the smell of burning electricity was just everywhere in the aircraft. And the aircraft was kind of wallowing towards the ground, and I thought we were going in. There's no two ways about it. I was holding my harness ready to kind of release it and get out of the aircraft. And the pilot was screaming, I can't see, because the actual windscreen had come in over him. About 15-20 feet above the ground, the co-pilot said, I have control, and managed to pull us back into the air. So a very near miss. And you have all that adrenaline that pumps through your body at that point, and then you're back in the air and you've survived. But we still had to get back to Camp Bastion, which was like 45-minute flying time. Because I don't think any of us wanted to use the escape and evasion training that we'd learned before and go on the run against the Taliban. So yeah, we had to kind of limp back to Camp Bastion, but we made it back in one piece. So the Chinook is a battlefield helicopter. It's a beast, and it can take a lot of damage. We absolutely tore it apart that day. and I've seen people take like 1.5 feet of some of the main blades before. Even here in the UK, but out in Afghanistan as well, they've had RPGs go through the aft head or one of the discs, and they managed to get it back to Camp Bastion to get patched up. So yeah, pretty strong, sturdy aircraft.
There's a funny mention in your book, which I've got here. I think I've read it about 3 or 4 times now. I've got to say it's absolutely brilliant. Anybody that's watching this, get this bloody book. It's fucking brilliant. It's pretty laughs and everything. But there's one section in it when you talk about that, when you talk about hitting the pylons, that I couldn't help but burst out laughing. It's when your brother asked you, do you know who the crew that Chinook was?
Yeah. Tell mum. Don't tell mum. There's a lot, even though whenever I was out in Afghanistan, there was a lot of stuff I just didn't tell my mum, because I think it's fair to say most of our mums make worrying a national sport, don't they? And especially when you've got a couple of kids who are out in a war zone. And I just didn't tell her a lot of the time what we were getting up to out there. Not when I was still serving. She knows a lot more about it now. But, I used to phone home, and I, for a long time, got away with telling her that all I did was move the post around. And she thought that I just moved all the letters around Afghanistan for all the soldiers. But, the truth is we were doing that as well as everything else. But yeah, that particular moment, whenever my brother goes, yeah, they were lucky to be on that. And I was like, yeah, just don't tell mum. So she's seen the photographs, so she knows all about it. And she read the book as well, so she knows everything now. Full disclosure.
See, coming up towards the end of your service, obviously, like most people, felt like you didn't want to leave. So what was the inevitable reason that caused you to leave?
Yeah, so whenever we got back from Afghanistan, my neck started to play up. I started getting like a really bad pain in my shoulders when I was looking over my shoulders, and I ignored it for a very long time, because as most aircrew will probably testify to, we know that as soon as you go to the dock with any neck or back issues, you get grounded straight away, and we all love flying, so none of us want that to happen. But it kept playing up, and I eventually, some of my colleagues talked me into going to the dock, and I was grounded straight away. So I did a couple of rehab courses down in the south near Odium, and then I went to a place called Headley Court, which was the centre of excellence at the time for all rehab, and all those injured soldiers that we picked up in Afghanistan all went through Headley Court. They were absolutely top of their game. And even they couldn't fix me. And essentially what had happened is I damaged some vertebrae in my neck from wearing a helmet, night vision goggles that we clip onto the front of the helmet. And I mean, you don't just clip those on and that's it. You put a counterbalance weight on the back of your helmet so that your helmet stays in the right place. So you've essentially trebled the weight of your head, which would probably be fine if you're always stood upright and everything was going through a center of gravity in your body, because that's how your body's designed, isn't it? Your head's on the top. But we as crewmen don't do that. We hang out the side door, we look underneath the aircraft at all the hooks, and then we're moving and humping and dumping all that kit in the back of the aircraft while wearing body armor. So it just took its toll, and it really damaged the vertebrae in my neck. And they couldn't fix it. So I was medically discharged, like you said, in 2019. And it was really hard to cope with at the time. I remember, I'd seen my life ahead of me, and it had always been in the Chinook Force. I'd a career path mapped out. I'd been written up for Master Air Crewman, which is the most senior rank you can really get without going for your commission. And then I was out on Civvy Street, age 37, way ahead of when I expected to be, and suddenly kind of ripped away from the job that I loved, and also all my friends. And I think, for a lot of us people that join the forces, we move away from home. So I'd left Northern Ireland at 19 with my little bag, ready to start my new adventure. So all of my new friends were all based around the military. And then suddenly I was like the kid that's not in the club anymore. So it was really, really difficult to get my head around. And I think that's kind of then that slowly started to unravel as the years went on.
Even though that you had now left the military, you were still going through your own personal battles, weren't you?
Yeah. And, I remember all those things that we saw on Mert. I remember at the time not being bothered by them. It would, and the things I've already described to you guys tonight, some of those really, really horrible images, they had never bothered me at the time. We had a job to do, just, scratch, move on. And I remember seeing other crewmen along the years really struggling, and a lot of crewmen left the force with PTSD. And I remember using the term, they caught PTSD. I'm thinking, well, hang on a minute, I've done more deployments than them. Why are they so soft? And thinking that I was invincible. And it was only in 2020 when lockdown hit, and I guess the world got very quiet. everything in my head started to get very, very noisy, and all those things that I'd squashed and put away in a Pandora's box at the back of my brain started to resurface. And I think one of the main reasons as well was I'd always used running as a coping mechanism during my time in the military, and I kind of joined and could barely run 1.5 miles. And then as years went on and I saw more and more, I guess, traumatic things, I just run, and it was my way. I think most people have got a coping mechanism for stress. You either go to the pub and get drunk, you go and pound a boxing bag, you go to the gym, whatever it is. We've all got that one thing to get empty the bucket. Mine had been running, and then in lockdown you couldn't run, you couldn't leave the house for more than 10 minutes exercise. So I really started to unravel very, very quickly. And then I knew I was in a bad way when one night I couldn't sleep. I developed insomnia because lack of exercise, lack of routine, developed insomnia. And then I was awake one night and started to look up the soldiers that we picked up on Mert who had died. And we all have logbooks from all of those sorties. I've got logbooks from every single mission I flew in the Chinook, and I was looking them up and personalizing them. Were they married, did they have kids, that kind of thing. And I say one of them had proposed to his fiance before he went and never made it home. And that personalization of the bodies was something we'd never done. They were just a body bag, very precious piece of freight, had to get them back to Camp Bastion, but don't think about who's inside. And I was now thinking about it far too much. And then about 2 months after that, I woke up one morning and decided that was it. I needed to stop the noise in my head, and that was going to be my last day on earth. And I spent the day planning meticulously, almost like a deliberate op at work, like a proper mission, how to end my life, and took a huge overdose that evening of 95 amitriptyline. So, there's no two ways about it. I'm extremely lucky that I'm here sat chatting to you chaps tonight, because I probably shouldn't have survived that. So there was certainly an angel looking over me that night for sure.
Well, obviously we're happy that you're still here, of course.
Yeah.
But after taking all that, you're extremely lucky, because that's enough to take you, I would say, a pill.
Yeah. And I guess the one thing that I guess did me a service is that, I'm the biggest social drink in the world. I think most military people are. We love a good knees up, and I'm Irish as well. But I've never drunk on my own, and I've never drunk to kind of solve problems or to deal with my issues. And I think whereas a lot of people do, people turn to different things when they're really unraveling, and drink was the one thing I hadn't. And I think that night, because I didn't wash it down with any alcohol, that's probably what saved me. So, I think I am very lucky in that respect. And there was a couple of other things that played a hand in me surviving, but yeah, really lucky. And I remember thinking at the time when I came out of hospital, the other side of it, that actually that was going to be the worst day of my life, that the darkest day of my life. But actually there was many more dark days to come. The recovery journey from the other side of that, and I guess the recovery journey of PTSD, it's not an upward trend. You hit so many potholes along the way, and you fall off the cliff again, and you have to climb your way back up. But it's a slow journey, but it is possible. And when now that the book's out, I do a lot of talks about mental health and I guess PTSD and the recovery of the other side of that. And I think, for anyone who is struggling mentally with PTSD or some other kind of trauma or depression even, there is light at the end of the tunnel. And with the right tools and people and support around you, can fully recover from it. And hopefully, I can be an example that you can turn something so negative around into something really positive. And there's the old saying, those glow sticks that we have, sometimes you've really got to break before you can shine. So for anyone who's watching this, who's really struggling mental health at all, it will get easier with time, and you can climb out of the hole, but you have to do it yourself. People can hand you the shovel all day long, they can throw the rope ladder into the hole, but you're the one who's got to start climbing. So I think, if you want to get better, you can recover.
So this is a question that we're going to be asking everybody that comes on this, and you can go into as much of your rant as you want, because we know what the answer is. Did you receive any help when you left? Anything to get you back on your feet, or when you were going through your dark moment? Were you receiving any help from the military?
Yeah, brilliant question. And no is the very simple and short answer. I did a talk recently, and someone said, how soon after your overdose did the RAF call to see if you're okay? And my answer was, well, I'm still waiting. They haven't, not in an official capacity. Obviously, I've got lots of friends that are still in the military, but in an official capacity, no one's ever chased it up. And I think, my recovery and all the support I got in terms of counselling and all that kind of stuff all came through military charities. So Help for Heroes, PTSD resolutions, and combat stress. And more recently, there's a thing called Op Courage, which is like an arm of the NHS for veterans and people who are still serving. And a lot of people don't know that it's for people who are still in uniform. So, they are the ones that put me back together. And the military did nothing. And I think, I look back at even our time in Afghanistan. We had, from the day I joined the military, we had absolutely no mental health training whatsoever. When we first started at OP Herrick, there was no mention of any mental health stuff the whole way through Iraq. And then even the early days in Afghanistan. And I think the nearest we came to do anything in terms of mental health support was we had a thing called TRIM, which was actually from the Marines. And the TRIM thing is a peer-on-peer mentorship thing where you basically check on your mates and go, mate, how you doing? You've been a bit odd today. You haven't been to the gym, or you're drinking a bit more than normal. And it's just that kind of peer-on-peer thing. But we all felt a little bit like it was arse covering, like the military had brought it in as a way of going, well, we are offering support for our troops whenever they see some pretty bad days. But the truth is it didn't really do anything. It wasn't effective. And I think, you then leave on a medical discharge and you essentially get kicked on the scrap heap really quickly. And there's a much better way to kind of discharge people from the military, in my opinion, in that I worked for 17 years at the same base and then was out of the club, like I mentioned earlier, overnight. Why not invite those soldiers or those people serving back 6 weeks later, then 6 months later, then a year later, and just take the stabilizers off slowly, because having the uniform ripped off your back is a really hard stop at the end. And I think that's where the military could do a lot more for that. And they could also, there's so much more PTSD training they could do for people before it happens, because if you have knowledge about any subject, it's not quite so scary when it happens. If you know how to change a tire in a car, even if you never ever have to do it, but you know how to do it, it's not quite so scary when the time comes to do it at the side of a motorway. And it's the same with PTSD and mental health. If we just had a little bit more training about it, even if it never happens, if it does, then at least it's not quite so scary, and you could probably recognize the signs a bit earlier and ask for help a bit sooner.
Now, it's gone back to what you said there a minute ago about getting the uniform ripped off you. It's not just the uniforms getting ripped off you, it's your identity.
Yeah. And I felt overnight, I think, it was all I ever wanted to do. And being a Chinook Crewman wasn't my job. It was who I was. I had my name on my chest, and that was, Liz McConaghy, Chinook Crewman. And it wasn't so other people could read it and see who I was every day. It was so I could read it and go, this is who I am. And suddenly it was all gone. And it's taken me a long time, I guess, and a lot of counselling to look back and go, I thought for all of my career that the uniform defined me. But I now realise, and this is for anyone who's in a uniform out there, you define the uniform. You breathe the life into that uniform, not the other way around. And it can be very hard to get your head around that whenever you take the uniform off, because you feel like you've lost everything. But actually the truth is you're still the same person inside. I was the same set of 17-year-old eyes looking back in the mirror. They were just a wee bit older and a wee bit more weathered, but it's the same set of eyes and it's the same person inside. So I think, for anyone who's watching who has served in any of the armed forces or blue light services or any company really, it's not the uniform that defines you. You define the uniform.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to quote something from a podcast that I actually seen from, I'm not sure if it was, Ant Middleton.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it was his podcast or the other guy's podcast, but I think it was the other guy that said, I can't remember his name, so if for whatever reason you ever did see this, I do apologise, but he makes a very good point in it. But he was talking more about the building industry, but it also applies to the forces. Why is it that all the equipment get maintenance check every day, gets checked, make sure everyone's fine, yet the people that are operating it don't?
That's such a good point. Yeah, I've never heard it put like that, and that's exactly it. We literally pull our people in every direction. It's like Play-Doh. The people in the military are really understaffed these days. Every single section is sprinting 100 miles an hour, and there's not enough people to do all the jobs, so people are working longer and that kind of thing. And technically, we're signed up for 365 days a year. But I look back at my 10 op Herricks that I did. I had to do 10 op Herricks because there wasn't enough people for us all to take a couple of tours off. And you expect so much of your people, but you never look after them, and that's a really good way to put it. I really like that analogy. I'll be stealing that for another one of mine at some point. Right. We do checks every day on our equipment in the helicopter, but just not each other.
And I was going to say something else there, but I've been put off. It'll come back at some other stage. But anyway, so what is it you do now? I know you say that you do a lot of stuff PTSD related, but I've noticed from our previous chats that you're extremely busy now.
Yeah, no, and it's good busy. I will never complain. I just feel really lucky to be alive, really, and that I survived all of the stuff that's gone on in the last 4 years. But on the back of the the overdose and into the kind of counselling sessions, I then wrote the book, and again it took me 3 weeks to write, and I always tell people that and I can't quite believe it, but it was just a brain dump onto a laptop, and it stayed in a file on my laptop. I had no intention of anyone ever reading the memoirs of Liz McConaghy. And I kind of joked with a friend one night when we were out walking. I said, like, don't laugh, but I think I've written a book. And she said, well, can I read it? So I emailed it to her, not really thinking much about it. She read it and said, look, this is really good. You should send it off and see what happens. So I kind of just scattergunned it out to a couple of publishers, not really knowing what was going to happen. And then it got published by Pen and Sword in 2022 and literally became an Amazon bestseller overnight. So that then kind of pushed me into this kind of speaking circuit, really, because things like books, by the way, for anyone watching who thinks, oh, I'm going to write a book, it'll make me loads of money. They don't make any money. I get £1 per book. But what it does, it kind of it opens some doors to then go into other avenues. And I now do motivational speaking. I think motivational is kind of always a funny term because I talk about my suicide attempt, my mental health and that recovery, and a lot about the things that happened on Mert. So motivational is maybe the wrong word, but I do loads of keynote speaking now and in and around those topics. And also being, one of the only females doing my job, I was always treated like an equal. And I have to say that, there's a very much a theme, hopefully you picked up in the book, that I was never singled out to be the weaker sex or the girl around the back of the tent crying. I was always just one of the team. But I think I put an internal pressure on myself to never be that cliche, to never be the girl crying around in the back of the tent or never be the weak one when we're on a squad run or something like that. I was always top of my fitness, like a real robot when it came to emotion. And I think all of that came from inside me. So I do a lot of talks now for companies about, how do you kind of encourage people who are in a minority to not feel like that. But one of the main topics really is resilience. And again, it's one of those words that people like Aunt Middleton and Foxy love to band around, with good reason, because it's a very hot topic these days. But I think it's fair to say my entire military career, I misunderstood what resilience actually meant. And I thought resilience meant unbreakable. And therefore, every time something else was asked of me or another deployment or an extra duty or whatever, I'd be like, yeah, I can do that because I'm resilient. And my boss said it in my report, every year. And that's not what resilience is. It's about bending and breaking and falling over and using those failures in life as lessons to come back stronger for the next battle. And, it's fair to say I've learned more about myself in the last 4 years than I ever did in my time in the military. And I'm stronger for my PTSD and my battles. If life's easy, we don't learn. I really genuinely believe that. So I think, it's about having the courage to admit your failures and talk about them open and honestly. And that's what I do now for a living. So it's pretty different. I get to travel quite a lot. Been to Europe doing some of them, get to do some skill groups as well, which is really good to kind of, I guess, inspire, but also talk about mental health because that's really important for the younger generation as well.
Well, what I can safely say, Liz, you're doing a fantastic job.
Oh, thank you very much.
Just keep doing what you're doing because I know for a fact you are definitely helping people out there.
I hope so. I do hope so.
Well, I think we will wrap it up for this episode.
I've got one question. So I'd imagine you've got quite a number of medals. Yeah.
Yeah.
What does your medals mean to you? Because of a few veterans that I speak to, they've either got they're in two things with it. Some of them love their medals and like they'll show them off and whatnot, and then others just didn't really care about them because it just brings back so many bad memories and stuff. What's your how do you feel towards your medals?
That's a brilliant question. So I'm, funny enough, on the not caring too much about mine, but not because they bring back bad memories. I don't think medals are a true reflection of people's service. And I'll tell you why. Because, I've got my Iraq medal, my Afghanistan medal, I've got my long service, good conduct, or not getting caught, as we call it, and a couple of Jubilee ones and various things for the Queen. But, I went to Afghanistan 10 times and I've got one medal on my chest for it. Other people go to Afghanistan once, and not to take away from what they did, but some people never even leave the wire. And just because of the role that they're doing, some people are storemen, some people are the admin assistants, some people are the chefs. And it's not to take away from what they've done, but I don't think necessarily the reflection that medal reflects, the guys out in the ground, the guys that are living in compounds for 6 months eating rations, the guys who have lost 7 of their friends, the guys who are literally getting bullets over them every single day. We all wear the same medal. So I don't even think my medal reflects what they went through. So I think medals are a bit of a funny one. I'm really proud of them. I'm very glad to wear them every year on Remembrance Sunday, but that's pretty much the only time they get dusted off, where they panic polish the night before. Yeah. I think most veterans will say they don't really want thanks for their service. I know a lot of guys like that, certainly from the OP Herrick eras, and they will be the people who are stood at the very back row in a remembrance service, who will never want to be seen, who will just shuffle away at the end, and they never want a big round of applause or any thanks for what they did, because it was their job.
As we see in America and everything like that, it seems to be the thing where the people go up to our people and say, "Oh, thank you for your service," and like that. We understand that it's different here. A lot of the vets don't like that. So, for example, when we bump into them, which is a common occurrence with us, let's take last Remembrance Day, for example. We always attend Remembrance Day in Edinburgh. Each guy that we meet in a pub, instead of saying, "Oh, thanks for your service," we'll get you a drink.
Oh, that's perfect. Yeah. And you know what? I think the only person I'd ever want thanks for my service is from the government. And I don't think the government support veterans enough in terms of mental health services and just things that they could give veterans that would make life a lot easier for them. Railway passes, for example, when you're still serving, you can get a travel card, and you can't get one now as a veteran, but you have to pay for it. And you just think there's a couple of little things that the government could make our life so much easier. But when it comes to civvies, that is exactly the right thing. I remember being in Remembrance Sunday a couple of years ago. I managed to get into the cenotaph. It was an extremely emotional day. I actually cried live on BBC. But after that, I don't think I bought a drink for the rest of the day. So that's always really appreciated. So yeah, I'll have to come to Edinburgh some year. That'll be the next box to tick. I'll come up to Edinburgh.
You're more than welcome to.
I'd love that.
You've actually, since you mentioned the government, I know that I try to be quick here, wrap up, but that was actually the question I was meant to ask. You've just made it pop back in my head. What do you think the government needs to do in order to help your veterans more?
Yeah, so I mean, they did have a government minister in Johnny Mercer, and obviously with the new government taking a post, they've actually disbanded that role, and that was key. He maybe wasn't everyone's cup of tea. I did particularly like him, but not everyone did. And I appreciate that. But at least he was there. At least we had someone in there who had a voice for us. I just think the government at the minute, they squeeze the forces to, so much to make them look good, or again, to always have a reaction if they need to send someone to war, if they need someone to look after the fire service, if the fire service are on strike. It's the classic, there's floods, send in the army. So we're there at every turn for them. We're their little weapon of choice, but actually when we need them, they're not there for us. And I think the government could do so much better in that respect. They could, look after their veterans. And it's not necessarily monetary stuff. It's just in the whole narrative, the perception, and the soft things they could offer in terms of even just mental health would be really, really good.
Well, Liz, we'll call it a day there. Again, I want to just thank you for taking the time to join us and kicking off our series.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure, and good luck with the series. I'm looking forward to sharing it on all my social media for you guys as well. And thank you for being such great supporters. It does mean a lot to us veterans that we've got people like you across the UK.
Well, before we call it that day, again, get the book. If you've not got it, get it. Because honestly, you'll not regret it. I've got it obviously here in paper form, and when I'm at my work, I've got my headphones.
Yes. I'll come up and
Well, again, Liz, thanks for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening, and good luck with the future.
Thanks, guys. See you later.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you.